and they didn't know what it was. But then Doyle got it too. And so they finally got the doctor in there, Dr. Hartvixen from Pocatello. And they
Hold
both.
on, Grandma. Jill said there's not any sound.
Oh.
I wondered because, dang. Let me text Ben really quick and say there's no sound. Yeah, the sound is not working, Ben. What can I do to fix? Oh, there's sound now. Okay, so start over.
I just said it.
Okay, so yeah, we'll just start over. So let me tell you who's on, Grandma, just so you can know them.
Okay.
So Jill's on right now, and Paige, and Ben, and Debbie, and Doug.
Oh, good, good. Okay. Jenny and them are coming home from Salt Lake probably. Anyway, I was talking about your dad, Grandpa Doyle. And he was born December 8th, 1931, to Ray and Virgie Armstrong, Chatterton. They had a little farm over in Virginia, which is the area between Downey and Lava, that mountainous area in there. They had a little farm. And Ray, his dad, and his mother were trying to make a go of that. Ray and Virgie went on a trip to the Oregon coast with one of her sisters and her husband. And when they came home, Ray was sick. And he just got sicker and sicker, and then Doyle got sick. Dr. Hartvixen from Pocatello came out and said that they both had typhoid fever. And I don't know what he did for him in those days. There wasn't any penicillin yet, I know. Anyway, the only memory Doyle had of his father was that he and his dad were sick, and they were lying in bed, and Virgie, his mom, brought him apples, and Ray picked out a little one and said, "Here's a little one for you and a big one for me." And they ate their apples together, and that's the only memory he has. He was about between 2.5 and 3. And Ray died, I think it was in September. I'm going to send a picture of his tombstone so you'll know the exact dates. He died, and after he died, you know, it was the depths of the Depression, and things were really tough, and you did what you had to do. And so Virgie couldn't farm that farm. I don't know what she did with it. I imagine it was part of the Chatterton land, and she just gave it back to them or something. Anyway, she took Doyle to her mother in Robin, and then she went to Salt Lake and worked and sent money home probably. But Doyle wasn't even 3, and so he doesn't remember that happening. All he knows is that he grew up at his grandma's, and he loved her. She was like his mother. He had lost his dad, and then he basically lost his mother because she went to Salt Lake to work. And so then he just had grandma, and there was no grandpa. Heber was dead. And there was an uncle, Doyle's uncle, that lived there. He was 18 years old. He was 15 years older than Doyle, and his name was Nolan Armstrong. And then Nolan got married, and his wife Bernice and he both lived there the rest of the time. Well, they always lived there because after his grandma died, Nolan just took over the farm. Anyway, Doyle was happy there. He loved the farm, and he had a neighbor just up the hill about a half a block away, and it was his cousin, and her name was Shirley Armstrong, and he and Shirley played together all the time as children, so he really enjoyed that. He started school, and it was a 2-room school, and the lower grades were in one room and the higher grades until high school was in the other room. And so there was grades 1 through 5 in the room he was in. And there was only one other boy in his class, so there were 2 of them. And Doyle always said I was the second smartest boy in all those grades, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. When he got out of the 5th grade, the summer he got out, he was 10 years old.
Grandma Doug asked, to what age did he live with his grandma?
What age?
Mm-hmm.
From age 3 until 10, 7 years. Anyway, when he was 10, one day I wanted to tell a little bit about life on the farm. Doyle was really upset that his mother wouldn't stay there with him or take him with her. And he remembers just crying and begging her to stay. And he remembered one day he took a kitchen chair and pushed it over in the corner and trapped her in the corner with the chair. And he wasn't going to let her go back to Salt Lake. But she pushed it away and went to Salt Lake anyway. And he just kind of disassociated. He just couldn't take it. And so he just kind of turned off his feelings towards his mother. And it took him years to overcome that. Anyway, when he was 10, one day his mother pulled into the yard in a car with a man. And she said, "This is your new dad, and we are moving to Pocatello. Go get your stuff." And he protested mightily. He did not want to move to Pocatello with them. He didn't know his mother. He didn't know his father. He didn't know his stepfather, Roy Steele. But they made him go, which he was very upset about. And he went with them. And when school started that fall, he started 6th grade. And after a few days in school, I don't know if they tested him or what, or quizzed him, I don't know. Anyway, they put him back in the 5th grade. They said that little school in Robin did not give him the knowledge and information he needed to be a 6th grader in Pocatello. So he was held back a year, which hurt his ego pretty bad. Anyway, they lived on South 3rd for a while, and they got him a bicycle, and that made all the difference in the world to him. He loved riding that bike and rode it all over South End of Pocatello. He made friends and started enjoying life again. Then they bought a little house on North Arthur, 1335 North Arthur. And now they've torn that house down, and it's an A&W root beer stand.
Oh, really? That's where their house was?
Yes. Lloyd and I went in there for a soda after exercise class one day, and I sat there and I had this weird feeling, and I said, "Lloyd, I think we're sitting exactly where Doyle's bedroom was."
Oh my God.
When that house was there. I just feel him all around me.
Wow.
Anyway, it's there now, and his house is gone. So he did okay in school. He got caught up and did okay in school. He went to the 7th and 8th grade at Irving. He was in school when he got there in Emerson, and then he went to Lincoln, I think. Anyway, he got in the 7th grade and went to Irving, and that's where Shirley and I went. But I never met him, didn't know him. He went through 7th and 8th grade there, and then 9th grade he started Pocatello High School. And he liked high school all right. He always worked, though. In the summers, he went back to Robin and worked on the farm as a farmhand. And he said one day that he was on the, what do you call it? It's a big farm machine that digs the ground. I can't think what it's called. Maybe it'll come to me. Anyway, he was driving the horse and plowing the ground, or disking it, or tilling it, or doing something to it. And the horse kept stopping and wouldn't go and wouldn't behave. And finally he got so mad that he stood up and kicked the horse in the rump. He was on the machine. He kicked the horse in the rump. Well, the horse took off and he was standing up. He fell down in front of that digger. And he knew that if that horse went forward, the digger would probably mess him up pretty bad. And so he knew if the horse stopped, he wouldn't be able to get out. Now, why don't I know how that goes? Anyway, this is what he said. He said, I knew that if I yelled, whoa, it would be the end of me. And so I didn't. I just laid there and held on. And the digger ran right over, the wheel ran right over the side of his head. And he always had a little notch in his ear
Wow.
where that hit him. But he said that a voice came to him and told him what to do. As he was falling, the voice told him exactly what to do. So he had that testimony at that time.
Wow.
And he went to church all his life. And as I told you a little bit about the school, I forgot to say that in the mornings they would saddle a horse for him and he would ride the horse to school. It was about 2 miles. And then he would get off the horse and give the horse a slap, and it would run home, and he would go on into school, and then he'd walk home. And one night he walked home and just barely got in the house when this huge lightning bolt struck out there. And there was a farmer on a machine in the field near them and right where he had walked by, and that man was hit and killed by lightning.
Wow.
So he always felt like he was pretty lucky to have avoided that. Anyway, then he got into high school and he immediately made friends with some of the best looking boys in school. They were all very handsome. Anyway, they did a lot of things together. And one of the things they did is ski. Doyle had a pair of big, long wooden skis that are still in the garage out there. If any of you want them, let me know. Anyway, you had to fasten your shoe or boot into the straps. It wasn't like today's skis. And there was a ski lift at that time between Cherry Springs and the mountain, Justice Park, what's that mountain called? Anyway, there was a ski lift there. And so he and his friends were out skiing, and you held onto the rope and it pulled you up the hill, and then you skied down. And he came down for the second or third time and fell and broke his leg. And it was a very bad break, a spiral break or something like that. So they put him in the hospital, and in those days they put you in traction. So his leg was up here hanging from a strap, and he was in the bed. And he laid there, and the leg was not healing. And he was in the hospital for 3 weeks. Anyway, the surgeon, the doctor came in on Friday and looked at him and said, this is just not working. We're going to have to do surgery on you, so I'm going to schedule it for Monday morning bright and early. And so Sunday afternoon, the elders came in to him. I don't know if they were sent to him or if they visited all the LDS people in the church, in the hospital. Anyway, they came in and they administered to him and they prayed that he would be healed. The next morning, the surgeon came in to do one last check before they took him into surgery and was amazed that his leg had turned the corner and was now healing. So he had to go to school on crutches for a while. It was a bad break, and that leg was always about an inch or an inch and a half shorter than the other leg.
Oh, wow.
So he wore a lift in his shoe his whole life. You kids probably didn't even know that. Anyway, he felt like the Spirit had once again helped him. So he did have a testimony at the church. However, these good kids that he ran around with took up smoking. You know, that was the cool thing to do. And he took up smoking, and he quit going to church. So he went through high school, and in the New Year's Eve of his senior year, he went to a party that one of his friends were throwing, and they had beer there, and the boys were drinking beer, the girls didn't. And his friend had asked me to go out with him on New Year's Eve, so I was there. And you all know the story of how Doyle and I met, and I think I told it on this, didn't I? On an earlier.
I think that you did.
I think I did. Anyway, his mother bought socks, and then went home and told Doyle she met the girl he was going to marry that day. Anyway, that's how we met, was at that party. And then we dated for the rest of that year, and he went to ISU for a semester. And then in December, they called him and said, "You're going to be drafted." So he joined the Air Force. And Holly's got some pictures she can take of him in his uniform. He was so handsome. And he and I had gotten pretty serious by then. So he went to Biloxi on his basic training, came home in May, and we got married and moved to Tacoma. And so he was an airman, and he was in radar. That's what he had done in his basic training, is learned how to do the radar. So he sat in front of the radar all day in Tacoma, Washington. They watched all the planes going in and out, always looking for enemy planes. And this was during the Korean War. So there was a great possibility that there might be ships or planes. Then they transferred him to Portland, Oregon, just down the road a couple of 100 miles. And I love Portland. And we lived there, we lived in Tacoma about 18 months. We lived in Portland a couple of years. And I think I said too that he went out on recruiting trips trying to get civilians to stand on the seacoast and look through binoculars and be airplane spotters. And then they had radios that they could radio in if an enemy plane approached the country. It's different to be in war, you guys. You don't know anything about that. Anyway, we were there for 2 years. And then we had Mark while we were there. And then a year later, I was going to have Lori a year and a month. She was due in late March. And so in early March, and even when I first got pregnant, it seemed like all of my friends would get what is called morning sickness. And I never got morning sickness. So I felt pretty lucky about that. I didn't with any of the kids. Anyway, Doyle got morning sickness. He would get up in the morning and go in and heave and just be so sick. And I teased him, you know, I'm glad you're so sympathetic with him, but that's going pretty far. Anyway, he was really sick, and one day at work he got into terrible pain, and they took him to the hospital just over the river in Vancouver, Washington. And they called me and said that he was in the hospital and that he had appendicitis. And so they took his appendix out. And, you know, it's not like the little keyhole. It was a pretty good scar. And he was in the hospital a few days, 4 or 5, I don't know. And one of his friends came and got me and took me over to visit him once while he was in the hospital. Other than that, I didn't get to see him. And about 2 weeks, if he hadn't had the appendicitis then, and we had come home to Pocatello, we would have not had a penny's worth of insurance. We would have had to pay for all that surgery. So we felt pretty blessed then. Then we moved to Pocatello, and he went back to ISU. In his first semester before he went in the service, he had taken what is just called radio. It was in the Vodtech area, and he learned how to take a radio apart and put it together and all that kind of stuff. which I'm sure is why the Air Force put him in radar. And then he went back to school for a semester, but he went on lower campus. And I don't remember what he was aiming at. He was just taking the basic courses. And when the semester was about over, and we had Lori after we got here, when the semester was about over, he said, I don't want to do this. I do not want to do it. And so he went out and applied for jobs at the post office, my dad's plumbing shop, B&G Plumbers, and a couple other places. Simplot, FMC, West Vaco, it was called then. Anyway, he applied for jobs several places, and they pretty much all were willing to hire him. So many of the young men were gone to the Korean War. And so he chose the carpentry, got a job with Darrell Booth, and started building houses. And he really liked that. He was a hard worker and he was good at it. And he did that for a few years, just 3 or 4. 3, because I hadn't had Debbie yet, so it was only a couple of years that he did that. And then we had some friends, Bill Ownby, and he was in consumer finance, a company. And they made him manager if he would move to Twin Falls. So he wanted to move to Twin Falls, and he talked Doyle into coming and working for him as the assistant manager. Well, that sounded a lot better than being a carpenter. You know, you could wear your suit to work and all this and that. So we moved. He gave up his apprenticeship with the carpentry, and we moved to Twin Falls. And we were there 18 months probably. I had Debbie while we were there, although I came back to Pocatello to have her. And then I had Jenny in Twin Falls. And Jenny was about 6 months old, and Bill Ownby moved to Burley to be the manager of a trailer sales. And he talked Doyle into going to Burley with him. So we went to Burley, and it didn't work out. Twin didn't work out. Burley didn't work out. We didn't make enough money. We were barely, when we had Debbie, I had to pay the hospital $2 a month. That's all we had. That's all we could afford. I remember Doyle gave me a home permanent once. I had to have a permanent, and we couldn't afford me to have a permanent. Anyway, we moved back to Pocatello, and he went back into carpentry. And I was very relieved, and so was he, that we came home. Oh, let's see, we moved into an apartment, and we ended up renting for 13 years before we got our first house. In those days, there were no government subsidies. You were on your own if you were going to buy a house. And so we had to save up some money to do that. And Doyle did the labor on it. And it was out on Sorrel, 5740, I think, Sorrel Drive. Dark greenhouse. And we lived there for 10 years, probably 9 years. Doug was 6 months old when we moved there. We had a dog named Duchess, a big dog, black, German Shepherd and Spaniel type thing mixed. Very gentle, very sweet dog, but he did bark at things. Okay, now, have I missed anything up to here?
Well, to go back up, you had that you wanted to talk about the farm. Life on the farm. You talked about, okay, I didn't know if there was more about what he had to do on the farm. And then the first time we started, you told the story how his grandma described the night he was born, but not on the second. So I didn't know if you'd want to say that again. And then I might have missed it, but just to clarify, which grandma did he go live with? Did you say her name?
Virgie's mother, Ada Rice Armstrong.
I didn't know if you said it. You had it written.
Yeah, I don't know.
And then Uncles and Christmas.
Oh, I forgot that. And I felt like that was something that really affected Doyle all his life. Ada, his grandmother, had 12 children. One of them died of worms when she was only about 4 years old, and the others lived. And so there were a lot of people at Christmas, all the aunts and uncles and kids, and that little 2-bedroom house, it was tiny. Anyway, they would come for Christmas, some of them at least. And the uncles, Doyle was the only little kid there about, and the uncles felt like they played practical jokes all the time on each other and everybody else. And so at Christmas, they played jokes on Doyle. And it was very traumatizing to him. Like one time he got coal in his stocking. Bad kids got black coal in their stocking. And just different things like that happened to him at Christmas time that just really ruined Christmas for him. And he really wasn't very happy about Christmas ever. The kids will tell you this, that when we were little, his birthday was December 8th. He would not let us put up the tree until after his birthday. We wanted to celebrate the birthday before we did Christmas. And so we always put up a tree way later than all our friends. And I remembered at least one New Year's that we couldn't afford a tree. And finally on New Year's Eve, we went out, or I went out, or he went out, I don't know. Anyway, we found a tree that was like a joke and put it up Christmas Eve when they were in bed asleep. So they didn't get as much Christmas as they could have. Anyway, that was traumatizing to him.
That would be.
Yes, and you know, when he moved from the farm, he lost his grandmother. So now he lost his father, his mother, his grandmother. So he had a hard life. Doyle was quite a serious man, although he loved a good laugh. When he'd laugh really hard, the tears would run down his cheeks. He liked a good laugh. So back to living on Sorrel, and a carpenter, and he took pride in his work, and he was a good worker. When he was building our house, he was a contractor by then, and he had an employee named Fred Hoffmeister, and he and Fred had just raised the front wall of our house, and that was up on East Chubby Road. That was another house. It was the house he was building for Sam and Diane Smith. Anyway, they raised the front wall of the house, and this huge wind came up, and that wall started to go, and they knew it was going to fall on them. So Doyle jumped out of the big front window. There were no glass in or anything. Jumped out the big window and landed in a pile of soft dirt, luckily. And Fred jumped out the other way and landed okay.
Wow.
But Doyle did not like the wind. He didn't like it from then on. It gave him a hard time. Anyway, he built the house on Sorrel, and that was a wonderful place to live. The neighbors, we were all kind of in the same accord. And then I think I've said about starting to go to church and doing all that. And then we quit and didn't go back for 37 years. Okay, what else?
You have 1983 an appraiser.
That's what?
In 1983, becoming an appraiser.
Oh, yes. He worked as a carpenter and then as a contractor. Times we had a recession type thing in 85, 86, and we lived on East Chubby Road then. And so instead of taking bankruptcy, which most of the contractors in town did, we sold that house and paid off our bills. So we basically started all over again when we were 50 years old. The only difference is we didn't have, we had all of our furniture and refrigerators and all that kind of stuff. So we felt lucky about that. And we rented a couple of years, and then we bought this house on Ada. It's funny, the word Ada. His grandmother was named Ada. We moved in here on Ada. And in Amway, when we won the distinction of being a direct distributor, they gave us a free trip to their city, tiny little town, where the big factory was, and the name of the town was Ada, Michigan. So that's Ada funny. And to get to Peggy's house in Nampa, you went up Ada and then turned onto her street.
It's followed you.
So that name followed us throughout the years.
And then you have hobbies, boat, travel, read, self-improvement.
Yes, we had a boat, a 19-footer, and it had the front bow open, and you could ride up there, and then the back was open, you know, where you drove it and everything. And he loved that boat, and he loved to go water skiing. That was the big deal. So I think all the kids, I'm sure they did, they all learned to water ski. And we spent many a happy Sunday at the lake and Saturdays. But he did love the boat. And we had friends that would go to Island Park and stuff with and go boating. Doyle's biggest hobby, though, over the years was, you know, when we got married, he claimed he had never read a book in his life. Well, my hobby was reading. From the time I was 6 years old, I was reading books. And when we got into Amway, I was reading 6, 7 books a week. The bookmobile stopped right in front of my house out there in Typhoid. And so I read a lot. Well, over the years, Doyle gradually picked up reading. And he became probably a bigger reader than me. He wasn't as busy as me, for one thing, with the housework and everything. So his books, he had built a closet in the back of this house, the back bedroom, full of books. And if you read the titles, there were books on physics, how to understand physics, math, everything, water, clean water, the importance of good drinking water. Everything he bought was self-improvement. Hypnosis, he got into the hypnosis, self-hypnosis books. And he even tried to quit smoking with hypnosis. His biggest category was alternative health. And he kind of made health nuts out of all of us. In those days, if you were interested in good nutrition or vitamins, for heaven's sakes, nobody took vitamins. They called you a health nut. Now it's very cool to be healthy and exercise and do all those things. But his library was really quite extensive, and how to be a better speller, how to be a speaker. He even went to the Dale Carnegie course of public speaking at one time. Everything was self-improvement. And he tried to quit smoking probably 10 times at least. And he went to Salt Lake and had staples put in his ears. He got hypnotized. He read books. He did everything, but he couldn't quit. He would quit for a little while and then start again. And I think that's why he wanted to drop out of church after we were active and went through the temple. He started smoking again, and I didn't know it. I don't know how I couldn't have smelled it, but I did not know it. And finally, on a trip, we were in California, and I said, I'm going to go to the bathroom. I'll be back. I came around the corner, and he was smoking. And he dropped the cigarette, looked at me, and oh, I was so mad. I said, if you're going to smoke, you smoke in front of me, and you smoke in front of the world. You don't go sneaking around hiding it. So he smoked. Anyway, you know, most of the things that we did wrong over the years, I do not blame him. I blame me. When I was the little girl, my mom and dad, Friday nights were their big night. During the Depression, when they were poor, they would have neighbors and friends, one couple at a time, come over to the house and play cards. They'd play cards till 2 or 3 in the morning. And they'd play cribbage and hearts and poker and I don't know what all. But they always had a drink, either a bottle or beer or something. And then as things got better, they started going out on Friday night. And I grew up thinking that's what you got to do when you were adults. You got to drink and go out dancing and have all this fun. So I think I probably encouraged the partying at first. And then, you know, I got tired of it and hated it and wanted him to quit and begged him to quit and all that, and he wouldn't quit. But after Mark died, the joy went right out the window. And he still went to the bar a couple of times a week. I had quit by then. But he didn't enjoy it, didn't like it, finally. And he quit smoking in 81. Mark died in September of 83. And by Christmas, he had stopped drinking entirely.
Wow.
Yes. And so that was pretty good.
That is, because it could have pushed him the other way.
It could have,
easily.
Mm-hmm. He had another bad habit when I met him. He bit his fingernails. Oh, they were always clear down to the quick. Well, he quit that first. He quit that in the 70s. And then in 81, he quit smoking. And then in 83, he quit drinking. So, see, you can overcome bad habits. All you got to do is work at it. Anyway, what did I tell you how he quit smoking about smoke enders? Or
I think so.
I think I did, yeah.
You have traveled. Did you talk about travel?
That was one of the things he really liked to do, was travel. And to him, that meant getting in the car and going for a ride. Mm-hmm. And it was hard to get him to go somewhere like Texas or Michigan or places. I wanted to see the country. Mm-hmm. And we retired. And then he did get so he would go more. When Doug and Melanie moved to Texas, then we went there. Most years we'd go once or twice, probably once. Anyway, Doug gave us a trip. He had flyer miles, money, I don't know, I think it was maybe a combination. But he set up this trip for us. We went to Toronto, Canada for 3 days. That was so neat to see that. We'd never seen anything like that. And then we flew from there to Hong Kong, stopped in Anchorage, Alaska to refuel. So we got to see the inside of the airport in Anchorage. And it was still daylight outside at 11 o'clock at night. And then we got on the plane, and the plane went right over Tokyo in Japan, where Doug lived, and lit in Hong Kong. And we changed planes and flew back up to Tokyo. So we were in the airplane for like 27 or 8 hours. It was long. But that airline was so neat. They gave you warm, damp towels to put on your face. And they served food, bowl of noodles. And we were eating. I looked around, and all the Japanese people had their bowl and chopsticks. And they put the bowl right there and just shoveled it in with chopsticks. And I tried it, but I couldn't do it. That was a wonderful trip. Anyway, we have some pictures from that. We stayed at Doug and Melanie's in Tokyo for, I think, a week or 10 days. And then we flew to Hong Kong again and stayed there for 4 days, 3 days, I don't know. It was so neat to see all that exotic stuff. Mm-hmm. And Doyle had a suit made while we were there. A guy stopped us on the street. "Me make you a suit," you know, in his Chinese accent, and took us to a little shop around the corner, and there were materials of every color, suiting material, wool. And Doyle picked out the color, and we went back the next afternoon, and they fitted him and adjusted a couple of things, and he had a suit.
Wow.
And they embroidered his name on the inside of it, Doyle Ray Chatterton.
Fancy.
Yes, and his dad had a suit with Ray Chatterton in it, so Doyle thought that was really neat. And it was a good-looking suit. When he died, I think I gave it to Zach, because Zach had the Chatterton name and was active in the church.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was one of our good trips. So Doyle really, as he got older, he showed more emotion towards us. He was kind of locked off, it seemed like, through the years. He just kind of stood back and was an observer more than getting right into things with the family. Pleasant, always a gentle person. I mean, he was great, but he wasn't a glad hand or anything. And so one of the things he just loved in his later life was this book. And Holly, you made it, didn't you?
Everyone.
Yeah. Anyway, it shows Doyle and I, and then this is all of the family except the Chattertons in Nampa. They weren't there. But he loved this book. There's letters from all the grandkids to Grandma and Grandpa. And he would sit and read this it seemed like every week he'd spend some time in it. He loved that. So time went by, we got old, and the kids all grew up and got married and moved away, and that's when we did all that traveling. And then in 2000, he retired. He retired, excuse me, in the 1997 January. He retired. That was a big year, 1997. He retired. My little brother Neil died of cancer. My mother died. And then I retired. I mean, it was a big year. And so then after all that, and we had retired, that's when we did the traveling. We would go to Arizona or Las Vegas and stay. Robert and Jenny had a big motorhome right out of their back door. And we would stay in the motorhome but eat in the house with them and use their shower and everything. It was so fun to do that. We went to Quartzsite where Peggy had a winter home and stayed there with them a couple of times. It was just fun and nice. In about 2004, Doyle was walking across here, and all of a sudden he kind of went to his knees. And I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "I don't know. I just felt terrible. I had this feeling of doom and horrible feeling. And then I just kind of blacked out or something." And he started having those spells. He called them spells. And he would just kind of unfocus. You'd be looking at him, you'd never know what was going on with him until you'd really look at his face. He'd get this look of dread and horror. I thought I turned you off. Could I call you back? Who is it? Oh, okay. Thank you, I will. That was my home teacher. I thought I went in the bedroom and fixed the phone so it wouldn't ring. I guess I forgot. Anyway, he had these dread feelings. We'd be driving, and I'd look at him, and he'd just be kind of staring. I got afraid, of him driving. Anyway, we went to the doctor, and the doctor had no clue. And so they said, "You need to see a neurologist." We called every neurologist in Pocatello. The soonest appointment we could get was 2 months away. And I called Robert and Jenny. Robert said, "Well, I'll fix that." They lived in Idaho Falls. And he called his friend, I think it was the CEO of the hospital, and said, "Who is a good neurologist? And I need to get my father-in-law in there quick." And so we got an appointment that next week with Dr. Garland, I think his name was. they did all these tests on Doyle, brain waves and all kinds of things. He wore monitors for 24 hours and I don't know what all. And they said that he was... Could I call you back? Who is it? Oh, Ricky. Okay, I'll call you back. Ricky and Haroldson's. Anyway, I'm going to leave that on so nobody else can call. Hide it so we don't hear it making noises. Anyway, the doctor's diagnosis was seizures. He was having seizures, but instead of the kind that you jerk and all that, he was catatonic. And the doctor said that each seizure would leave him in a depressed state for at least 8 hours. Well, he was having 15 a day. I mean, it was kind of bad, you know. And I was so worried about him. I didn't know what was going to happen. Darn it. Anyway, they gave him some medicine. And of course, the first thing he did was pull it up on the internet, and the side effects were 2 typing sheets long, which terrified him. He was more afraid of that than he was the medicine. So unbeknownst to me, he went down here to Dr. West. Dr. West gave him something called industrial drops, and they were in a little eyedropper bottle, and he was supposed to put so many drops of that in his water and drink it. And I didn't know that he did that. We were going to go to Texas in December, or Thanksgiving, I think it was Christmas though. And Doyle knew that if he told me he had gone off the medicine that Dr. Garland gave him, that I wouldn't ride with him. I would want to fly, and he didn't want to fly. And so he didn't tell me. I was afraid he'd have a seizure, you know, and wreck the car. Anyway, we went and came home, and then in January he finally confessed that he wasn't using Dr. Garland's medicine, that he was using Dr. West's medicine. And on that medicine, industrial drops, he never had another seizure.
Really?
Well, Garland's medicine stopped the seizures, and they gradually, Dr. West and Doyle, gradually switched him using a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Finally, he was on the industrial drops entirely and never had another seizure. So that was good. So just a year later, not much longer later, Doyle started hurting through his neck and back, and we thought sure he was going to have neck surgery. And so he went to Dr. West before he went to any bone doctor. And Dr. West looked at his hand, and he said, Doyle, your hand should not be like that. There's something wrong. I think you have a pinched neck in your, a pinched nerve in your neck, and it's cutting off circulation. His hand was emaciated. There was no flesh, no flesh. His hand was just bone. And, you know, I had noticed that, but I thought, we're getting old. You know, he's losing his flesh on his, I don't know. Anyway, Dr. West immediately ordered an MRI. We got the MRI and took it to the VA because they were Doyle's primary care. And they sent it to Salt Lake to the VA hospital. And a few days later, we got a phone call, and they said, come to the VA hospital. Gave us an appointment. So we went down there, and they had a neurologist, a real good neurologist that was in private practice in Salt Lake, but they took time to go to the VA hospital. He did a test on Doyle where he put little needles all over in his arms and legs and every place. And when he was finished, Lori went with us. When he was finished, he said, well, he said, usually it takes at least 3 weeks to get the results of the tests that we do. But I can tell you right now, Doyle, that you have Lou Gehrig's disease. Nobody ever lasts beyond 5 years. You've got 2 to 5 years, depending on how long you've had it. And Doyle had noticed that he had lost strength in his left arm when he stuccoed our house and did some kitchen remodel and all that. He had noticed that he just had lost strength. And he figured it was because he was an appraiser and not a carpenter and hadn't kept that physical up. Anyway, that was in March 29th, or April 29th, 2006, I believe. And so he gradually lost strength in that arm, and then it hit this arm, and he could hold something. If he got a hold of it, he could hold it, but he couldn't much pick things up or do much with his hands. He could pick something up and put it in this hand and hold it, but he was just losing strength all the time, and it seemed to be mostly in his arms. He could still walk, and he had this terrible fear that he would not be able to walk. He kept saying, if this is going to kill me, I hope it does before I lose my ability to walk. And so we went back to the VA every 3 months, because there was nothing. They can't do anything for Lou Gehrig's. The only thing they could do was give him a medication, and he read about it, and it said that it might prolong your life 6 to 9 months. And he said, if I'm paralyzed from all the way down, why would I want to live another 6 months? So he refused the medicine. The good thing about that disease is there wasn't a lot of pain. He had terrible cramps, mostly at first, and they called them fasciculations, I think. And you could see it ripple right up his skin and go. You could see little things raise up under his skin, just kind of sweep through. And he got cramps everywhere, even in the side of his nose once. He got them everywhere. But that faded as the disease went on. It kind of faded. So he was 178 pounds almost his whole adult life. When he died, he was about 125. He'd lost about 50 pounds. And his throat got bad. I fed him his breakfast one morning, sitting in the big chair, which was a mistake, because he's sitting like this and I'm feeding him. It was Easter Sunday, and suddenly he choked. And he tried to get up to come out in the kitchen and fell right by this chair. And oh my gosh, I called 911. Tell me how to do CPR. I can't remember. Tell me how to do it. And she kept saying, now just stay on the line. And okay, fine, but tell me how to do it. And she said, I've got help on the way. I told her he had Lou Gehrig's. And so she told me what to do, and I started doing that. And they told me to get him into a kitchen chair if I could. And so I did get him up and get him into the chair. It was not easy. And about the time he sat down in the chair, I could hear footsteps running up the sidewalk. The firemen were coming in. I had opened the front door so they could just run in. And about that time, he coughed and out it went. It was a piece of potato or bacon. I don't know what it was. And so then he was reviving, and they said, we've got to take him to the hospital anyway. But from the chair to this chair, he had quit breathing and turned kind of bluish 3 times. He had lost all his breath, and then it somehow or other gasped and get another breath, and it was awful. Both neighbors came in, and it was terrible. Anyway, he was in the hospital a few days with that. And then he was in the hospital other times. Constipation was one of the reasons he'd have to go to the hospital. Very expensive enemas at the hospital. Anyway, it was a hard time. And he got the dementia that is rare it's a certain dementia that is Lou Gehrig's dementia. You don't get it otherwise. And he got that. And so there were times that he would be real confused. And his biggest confusion was going home. He wanted to go home. And so in the middle of the night, he'd come into my room and wake me up and say, we've got to get out of here. Those people are going to come any minute. Take me home. Take me home. And I would try to give him the logic of, we are here. Look at this. There's your shoes. You just took off to go to bed. We're home. No amount of logic would sway him. And he wouldn't argue or anything. He'd just say, take me home. Take me home. And so it was hard. I would take his oxygen off from the house thing and switch it to a portable tank like that, and get me dressed and get him dressed and get him in the car. The first time it happened, I called Debbie. It was about midnight. And I said, Debbie, your dad's insisting we take him home. I don't know what to do. Can you run down? She came down here and he just kept saying, take me home. And we didn't know what to do. We were about to call 911. And I said, well, let's get him in the car and drive a little bit and then see if he thinks we brought him to his home where he wanted to be when we came back here. So we got in the car and she drove, and then she went somewhere up on the hill and said, okay, Dad, do you know where you are? Of course I do. Well, tell me how to get home. Well, you know how to get there. I know, but you tell me which way do we go? And so he would direct her back to this house. And we'd go in and I'd get him into bed. And that was the first time. We'd get him into bed, and then a couple hours later he'd wake up and take me home. I'd get up, change his oxygen, get dressed, get him dressed, get him in the car, take him for a ride. One night it was such a blizzard. It was such a blizzard. I called Larry. I can't do this. I'm afraid to drive. And good old Larry came right down and got him in the car, and we went for a ride, and then he brought him home. One night I put something that shouldn't be there, like the pepper, in the middle of the living room floor. I said, okay, now when we come back, if that pepper's there, you'll know that it's the same house we just left. We'd come home. He was oblivious to it. It didn't matter to him. And some of the things were funny but sad. Like one night he came in and woke me up and got into bed. And what are you doing? Because he had his own bedroom that he liked to read late, so he moved in there when we were about 45 or something. Anyway, he said, oh, this big fat man keeps trying to get in bed with me, and I don't want him to sleep with me. And so we laid there a few minutes, and then I said, okay, I think he's gone now. So he got up, and we put him back in his bed, and he was okay. Another night he came in and woke me up and said, how did you do that? And I said, what? He said, how did you do that? And I said, what? And he said, how did you get up in my window that way? And I said, what? And I got up and went in there with him. He said that I got up into the window and was hanging onto the frame with both feet and both legs. And he didn't know how in the world I did that.
That would be impressive.
I was between the Venetian blind and the glass, so I was very thin. Anyway, the things that he did and said were funny sometimes, but sad. One night we were sitting there watching TV, and he looked over at me and he said, now, who are you married to? He didn't recognize me, and I got up and went, oh, honey, I'm married to you. And he looks at me like, lady. Anyway, I got on his lap and said, we've been married 54 years or whatever it was. And he finally said, okay, and probably to get me on his lap. Another night, he saw kids right here by the TV. And he said, what are those kids doing here? I don't want those kids to be here. Are you tending them? Are you babysitting or what? And I said, oh, they're just neighbor kids. They'll be gone soon. And he said, well, get them out of here. I don't want them here. And I said, okay. And then I went over and sat in a different chair and asked him if he remembered something or other. And we talked, and he forgot about the kids. So things like that happened a lot. We went to Salt Lake for, I'm sorry, I'm not crying, but my nose thinks I am. We went to Salt Lake. They were going to measure him for an electric wheelchair. And we went there, and the woman was measuring his back end, and I don't know what else she was doing. And Doyle said to her, he says, you just don't know what a wonderful wife I have, which is unlike him to say something like that in the first place. And she said, oh. And he said, you know, we have 3 houses in Pocatello, and each one of them are exactly alike. The same furniture, the same knickknacks, everything in that house, even our clothing, is identical to the other 2 houses. And she looked at me and said, what's going on? And I said, well, he has that dementia that Lou Gehrig people get sometimes. And she said, Helen, to the assistant, would you take Mr. Chatterton out in the hall and let him practice riding an electric chair? Yes, so she took him out, and she says, I cannot give him an electric chair. If he has dementia, he'll kill somebody, maybe himself. I can't give him an electric chair. And I said, well, okay. And she says, I'll give him a regular ALS chair. I said, no, I can't push it. I tried to push him from one building to another, and it was just a very slight incline. I couldn't push him. I didn't have the strength. And Lori ended up pushing him over there. And I said, just skip it, the whole thing, and I can't push him. And she flounced around a little bit, and then she said, well, I'm going to give him an electric chair, but I'm going to put on the order that it's under my protest, that it's against my better judgment. And I said, well, don't give him one. She says, no, I'm going to give him one. And I start to cry. I can't tell that.
It's okay if you cry, Grandma.
Anyway, I said, how much do those chairs cost? Because I thought, well, maybe I could buy it. She said, $30,000. I said, we can't put him in a $30,000 chair. That isn't fair to other people. You might give it to him, and then he might die in 6 months or something, and it's just a waste. And she says, no, we bring him back and outfit him for the next person. So that was okay. So she was going to give him an electric chair. They had already given him a chair that folded up that he can push, work himself. Well, he couldn't because his hands didn't work. I had to push it. Anyway, but he still walked. So a week or 2 later, this truck pulls up in the driveway, and the guy gets out an electric wheelchair, which we were excited about. Then he gets out another. These ALS wheelchairs are that high, and you can live in them. The people can actually live in them. They lay flat, they recline. I mean, you know, they can't get in and out of it themselves. Mm-hmm. And she also ordered a thing, I think they called it a Hoda, that would pick him up out of his bed and put him in his wheelchair, because there's no way I could lift him. Anyway, they had that ordered. They came to the house and put a railing on my back porch steps and in our bathtubs. I mean, the VA was wonderful. They did everything for him. They had determined the year before he died that any military man that got ALS, no matter how long after he was in the service, would be considered a military disability. So they started sending him a little check. It was $30 or $40 a month, I don't know. Anyway, they were going to supply all these things free. The wheelchair and the lifter out of the bed, and they gave us a lot of stuff that I gave back to him when he died. Anyway, it's hard. Anyway, his hands and arms got weaker and weaker, and finally he couldn't do anything with his hands. I had to do whatever you do with your hands. Comb his hair. He had pretty hair. Anyway, I don't know. There's so many things about it. I can't go into all of that, or I'd be here all day. But the thing I want you to know about it is that he was so thankful that he could still walk. He was just thankful. He talked about that way more than he did the fact that he couldn't move his hands or arms. I never once heard him say, "Why me? Why me?" Or, "This isn't fair, I shouldn't have this." He never complained, really. And he got so verbal, which he had never done, and told me how much he loved me and what a good mother I had been. And our kids, they were perfect. Not one child had ever done a thing wrong. They were perfect kids. And his life was perfect. He appreciated it, which he had never verbalized those things in our whole marriage. So it was nice to hear it. But anyway, he died June 11th, 2009. And like I say, the military had decided, every military guy, the incidence of ALS among the regular population was like there. If you were in the military, it was like there. If you were in radar, it was like there, and he was in radar. So they took full blame for it. So he died. We all went on. It was hard. It's real hard. But, you know, you go on, you build a happy life again. I'm so thankful for my family and everything. I'm just thankful for everything. And I'm really thankful that we got active again in the church in 2003 before all of that started. So I didn't feel like he just, "Oh, I better go to church, I've got a bad disease." He never, you know, he went before all that happened. So I don't know how to wind it up. Have I left out anything important? I don't think I have.
I don't think so.
Okay, well, that's the story of your papa. And I love your comments on it. And I think I'm about through with these. I don't know what else to tell you. Jill wanted me to tell what dogs we had. So I'll get that together and do that and just try to wrap it. So let me know what else you'd like to hear about it. And I'll see you soon, hopefully. Love you all.